Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my March wrap up, which honestly, I am shocked with how much I was actually able to read this month between moving and everything that was going on. I somehow completed a total of 9 books. Definitely my best reading month so far this year. I will say I did read a bunch of shorter books, which I think helped propel me through more titles than usual, but nonetheless, I'm very happy with my progress. I do also want to quickly shout out, I'm testing a new mic setup. This room does have a bit of an echo, so I thought a mic might help a bit, but I'm very much a newbie when it comes to a lot of this stuff, so there might be some trial and error, and I appreciate any patience. But nonetheless, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the 9 books I read in the month of March. Wow. The first book I'm going to chat about is honestly like starting out with a bang, and that is book 2 to the Crescent City series, which is House of Sky and Breath. I have an entire reading vlog dedicated to my reading experience of this book, which ended up being incredibly painful. Let's just say full of disappointment, hated every second of it, and I still don't even know how we got here, really, honestly, at this point. Before I go into some thoughts and feelings about this series, I really want to say generally, I enjoy Sarah J. Maas's writing. I went into this book hoping to love it. I thought it would be the perfect distraction. I was in a very stressful time with the move coming up, and I just wanted something that would just be fun. And unfortunately, it was not fun for me. Obviously, if you liked this book, I'm happy for you. I wish I was you, but let's talk about my thoughts and feelings. So this is the second book to the Crescent City urban fantasy series, which basically is set in a city called Crescent City, where a large variety of different magical creatures exist. And the city itself is kind of sectioned off into different sections, controlled and ruled by different supernatural creatures. Particularly humans in this world are not treated very well, and even other types of supernatural creatures are treated like second-class citizens. The series itself opens on our main character Bryce, who is a fun-loving party girl, but at the beginning of book 1 faces unspeakable tragedy and finds herself in the midst of an investigation to try to figure out what happened. She works with another individual named Hunt, and they have a very dramatic will they won't they, hate each other, love each other, drawn to each other sort of relationship. Book 1 was kind of smaller in scope, focused primarily on this investigation, but hints of a larger political conspiracy were definitely hinted at the end of book 1. I liked book 1. I didn't love Bryce, I didn't love Hunt, but I found the characters to be in general entertaining and the plot to be very fast moving that I read it super quickly. Book 2, however, I had so many issues, and it seemed like my issues with book 1 kind of compounded on each other, and then it also didn't have the elements that I liked in book 1 to help offset that. To keep it brief, because I could honestly be here all day, my first major issue was the pacing. This book was 700, maybe 800 pages long, and so much of this book did not need to happen. There was hints to these larger political issues, which I honestly found to be super interesting, but the actual plot progression towards revealing some of these issues took forever, and the actual plot payoff was just simply not there. 2, I found Bryce and Hunt as our primary characters to be so insufferable. I hated Bryce's one-liners. I hated their relationship. I just could not get behind this mate romance that we were kind of thrown into. And lastly, usually what I really enjoy about Sarah J. Maas's books is that if you don't love the main romance, which I haven't in her past series, there's at least some really gripping side romances and side characters that you can really fall headfirst into, but they just simply did not exist for me in this series. And I think a large part of the issue there is that the majority of point of view chapter characters we got were from men. It was all men in Bryce. I just did not have a fun time reading this book. I kept waiting to like it more, and it just did not happen. But honestly, what annoys me the most is that the ending, the last like 20 pages of this book was like, oh, dang it, I'm gonna probably have to read book 3 because I want to know what's gonna happen. It was like an awful ride, but she hooked me at the end. But anyway, I don't wanna make this wrap up a rant. If you wanna see me rant, go ahead and watch the reading vlog, which I will link down below, but it ended up giving Crescent City, House of Breath and Sky like 1.5 stars. Again, I wanted to love it, but I simply just could not. After completing that book, I had fear that I was going to fall into a reading slump, so I decided to immediately pick up an author that I knew I loved. So of course I started the first book to the Rain Wild Chronicles. It's not this, I accidentally packed it. The first one is Dragon Keeper, which I will put on the screen now. And honestly, I was delighted by this book. I appreciated the slower plot. I love delving into these new characters' points of view. And honestly, I was quickly reminded that I just love Robin Hobb's multi-POV stories. I love Fitz and the Fool, but just her dynamic characters, particularly her female characters that she writes within a fantasy setting, I love so much. And I also found the range of characters we encounter so far in the Rain Wild Chronicles are incredibly interesting as well, as I do feel like she's focusing on outcasts, people that society have essentially deemed to not just be worthless, but possibly a burden on society. And all of these characters are kind of taking their own fate and their lives in their own hands. And it's not even so much about proving other people wrong. It's almost like proving to themselves that they can be whoever they want to be. And she really explores this across class, across age, and let's just say like species of individuals. Talking specifics about the series is honestly very difficult because inherently it will spoil things that happened in the previous 3 series. But to kind of give you guys a general overview, the Rain Wild Chronicles is multi-POV. It is a lot about exploring not only new places, but new people. I love that there is adventure at the heart of it, and obviously the political consequences of what occurred in the first 3 series is very much present here. And I'm also hoping that we're also going to get more context to the history and the past and the magical past of this fantasy world. I'm hooked. It was definitely a slower burn, but one that I honestly fell into right away, and I can't wait to check out the rest of the books in this series. It was kind of a quieter series, which I liked, and I ended up giving this book a 4.25 out of 5 stars. Next up, I fell into kind of a period of time where I only wanted to read like magical, fantasy, weird retellings, like fairy tales come to life that would just keep me entertained, but also would be quick reads for me. The first one is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This was one of my most anticipated releases for this year, and honestly, it lived up to all of my personal hype it could. Just from the writing style to the characters and just the overall vibe of this book, it delivered in every way, shape, and form. And it's also a good reminder to give authors a second chance. I read another book by this author a few years ago. It was a YA fantasy release that really didn't land for me, but I loved this adult fantasy release so much. But this book is kind of set on this magical remote island, and the history goes on this place hundreds of years ago, the land has been cursed. It is populated by 2 different groups of people, and there was once an attempt at tenuous peace, but unfortunately this spiraled into violence, and now the people that live on the east and the west side of this island do not interact in any way, shape, or form. And ever since this occurrence, the land itself has been cursed, with one side having bountiful crops and animals and land that is lush to live on, but very limited magic, and the magic itself kind of hurts the user, with the other side being very barren but having lots of magic. At the beginning of this book, one of our main characters, Jack, is called to return back home to this island. He left 10 years previously to train to become a bard, but he's been called back home to help try to solve a mystery. And that mystery is young girls are beginning to disappear on the island without a trace, and many are concerned that it has to do with the spirits of the island being angry at the residents. So they're hoping that Jack's training and being a bard will be able to reach out to them. When he arrives, though, he realizes that he has to work alongside his childhood arch nemesis, Adria, and they begin to work together to try to solve this mystery and also begin to grow closer together as well. I loved this book. First and foremost, storytelling is so central to this book. Obviously, one of our main characters is a bard, so song and myth and folklore is just woven through every inch of the story. The ambiance of this island and the magic of this place is exceptional. It's also multi-POV, so we actually follow a variety of characters on one side of the island, and they're all touched by this place in different ways. Obviously, the central component of this book is this mystery and watching our 2 main characters attempt to solve it, but you also quickly realize that this mystery is kind of tied to the larger legacy of the island itself and this search for peace between the 2 sides. It's just so good. The writing, the idea, the execution, I loved it so much. I flew through it. I did not want to put it down. I also found the romance and just the characterization to be so soft and so romantic and believable. Honestly, I loved every second of this book and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I picked up is another mythology focused story, and that is A Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. And this is a folklore story through and through. This is a mythology retelling, and oh my gosh, the vibes of this are also immaculate. This basically follows our main character Angerboda, and she is an immortal witch, and at the beginning of this book she has just been burned at the stake and she's come back alive with Loki basically giving her back her heart, and she has moved to the edge of the world into a cave and has basically renounced the gods, civilization, giants, everyone. She doesn't want to utilize her magic, which kind of got her in trouble with the gods in the first place, and she just wants to live alone. But then she meets Loki, obviously, and they begin to fall in love. And from there, you kind of follow their love story, Angerboda's life, her children, and everything that kind of surrounds the lore and mythology around her character and Loki's character within Norse mythology itself. And what I really loved about this book is that it somehow is so human. Angerboda's feelings, the relationship between her and Loki, it was really rooted in a place that you can understand, sympathize, empathize with, but it also had all of the weirdness that also exists within mythology tales, like people turning into goats, people turning into horses, people giving birth to snakes, like all of these strange quests, all of these bizarre things that exist within those stories were present within this. The writing itself within the story was beautiful. It was lyrical. It really drew me in. It was really true to the mythology itself. It's not even quite a retelling because a lot of these stories are exactly what was written down in lore. But what the author really did was change the perspective at which that we were watching these myths unfold. And we also watched them with the context of Angerboda's life and her feelings and her point of view on the matter, which just add this layer of humanity to the entire thing, which really made this book sing. I really enjoyed it. I honestly did not know much about Norse mythology at all, but between the storytelling and the writing and the characters present in this book, I need to check out not only more books by this author, but also books also inspired by Norse mythology because I need to learn more. I really liked this. It gripped me immediately. It was an incredibly unique read and I gave it a 4-star. Next up, I wanted a bit of a lighter read, something that would hold my attention, but ultimately would kind of put a smile on my face. So I decided to pick up The Maid by Nita Prose, and this did just that. This is a charming closed-door mystery story following our main character Molly. And Molly is a maid at a very high-end hotel. Molly herself loves her job, particularly because she can focus on just making everything clean and she doesn't have to interact with too many people. Molly herself is a little bit different, namely she kind of has a hard time understanding social cues, so she can find social interactions to be overwhelming. At the beginning of this book, Molly is also grieving after the recent passing of her grandmother and is just trying to find a new focus in life. Unfortunately, at the beginning of this book, Molly enters one of the rooms that she is supposed to clean and stumbles upon a dead body of a very wealthy patron, and from there she kind of finds herself in the center of the police investigation, and once she realizes that she might be suspected herself, she kind of throws herself headfirst in trying to solve the case herself. This book is classically a true-done-it story, and obviously the murder mystery is a big selling point of this book, but I would say that the mystery itself isn't so difficult to kind of unfold and understand, and the real star of this book is Molly herself. Not only is she just so charming and you're just rooting for her throughout this entire book, but seeing her kind of navigate this mystery and ultimately become more confident in herself and begin to realize and surround herself with people that care for her like she cares for so many other people in her life was just a delightful book from beginning to end. I wouldn't say that this book was mind-blowing in any way. This is not my favorite or best mystery book I've ever read, but it was also very delightful. It was exactly what I needed. I honestly had a smile on my face reading this book the entire way through. It's also not very long, so I was able to read it super quickly, and it was the perfect book I needed to distract myself. If you're looking for kind of a feel-good thriller book, I would highly recommend this story. It's a very unusual combination, but honestly worked so well. Like, we need more feel good whodunit stories. Or maybe I just need to find more of them because I really liked it. But ultimately, I gave this book like a 3.5 stars. It was solidly entertaining, really good, not perfect by any means, but utterly delightful. Next up, I decided to pick up a more intense historical fiction story. So I read Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-hae Kim. This was highly recommended to me by so many of you guys in the comments. So I was really looking forward to picking this book up. This is a sweeping historical saga following a huge variety of characters and is really centered on the concept of fate and the red thread of fate kind of connecting people through time. The story itself takes place over a large swath of time and is set during significant moments in Korea's history. We follow the initial colonization of Korea by Japan through World War II, the Korean independence movement, and the ultimate division of Korea in North and South, and even into the 1960s following the initial reign of one of the military dictators of South Korea. Through all of these significant moments in time, we follow a variety of characters throughout their life. I would say our predominant main character is a girl named Jade, and we follow her from a young age when she's sold by her family to become a courtesan, all throughout her entire adulthood as a successful courtesan, and then ultimately her life after the war and after kind of settling down into the next chapter. We also follow a variety of men, some who are rich and powerful, some who are involved in the Japanese military, and some who are incredibly poor and who are just trying to find their own way and their own chance within Korea at this time. This book is really emotional, it's really heavy, and I do want to say a variety of trigger warnings from sexual assault to colonization, war, violence. There's a lot of dark things that kind of happen throughout this tale and story. That being said though, a lot of this book is about like human perseverance. You see people kind of make the best of their circumstances, or at least survive their circumstances to make it to another day. On the flip side though, I was kind of expecting this to have a more central romantic plot line, and while I will say love is very central to this book, I would more say unrequited love is a much more significant part of this book. In fact, a lot of the story is people wanting to rely on another and wanting something from them that they simply cannot provide them, and seeing the heartbreak and the eventual moving on that a lot of these characters face. And also I would say what I think is really interesting in a lot of the story centering on Jade and she being a courtesan is that not only was the courtesan culture really interesting to learn about, but Jade being a courtesan is in an interesting place in Korea society. She's at the lowest echelon, but also in some ways the most able to be independent, both financially and just like socially free. That being said though, I do feel like there was a large element of this book kind of showing that everyone was having a hard time, but as a woman it's even more difficult because of the reality of beauty and looks being held to such a high standard, and being fresh-faced is so significant to their worth to society at large. I really enjoyed how the author connected all of these characters through time and through fate. I found that to be a really strong aspect of this book. The writing was really beautiful at times, and there were some lines that I really wanted to highlight and remember forever. I do honestly wish the book itself was longer. We did kind of speed through some significant historical moments. We spent more time in other places. And honestly, I almost wish that this book was like 800 pages so we could just have more time spent in these important historical moments. That being said though, I do really feel like this was a fantastic debut, and I will for sure be reading more books by this author in the future. And I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I had a bit of a 24-hour readathon to try to get through a few more TBR books. I was really inspired after I counted how many unread books I had on my shelf, so I said, let's read some short books in a 24-hour span. So these are the books I was able to complete. First is a very beloved contemporary story that I'm happy I finally got to, and that is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was a fun, delightful, but also emotionally impactful contemporary kind of steamy read. This basically follows our main character January, and at the beginning of the story, she is going through a hard time. She recently lost her father, she's dead broke, and she also owes her editor a book by the end of the summer, but unfortunately is facing the worst writer's block of her life. Therefore, she decides to move into her father's lake house in hopes of crafting the perfect summer romance by the end of the summer. But once she arrives, things get worse because her neighbor turns out to be her college arch nemesis, Gus, who is her polar opposite in every way. Where she likes to write romance stories, he likes to write the great American novel novel that are basically incredibly depressing. They decide to kind of place a bet against each other where they challenge the other to write each other's genre, and they also kind of workshop with each other in hopes of kind of breaking their own writer's block. Naturally though, all of this time spent, all of these hijinks, all of these excursions make them closer together, and we begin to watch a romance unfold. This book was such an easy and fast read. First and foremost, I loved reading from January's point of view, and I do appreciate that a lot of the conflict was more about like emotions. Not only did we have to watch January kind of overcome her own personal family demons and kind of confront a lot of the grief that she is experiencing at the beginning of the story, but the same can be said also for Gus, and watching them be emotionally vulnerable with each other was really nice to see. And I will say it also really increased the romantic tension that existed between the two of them, and also the sort of enemies to lover plotline that existed in the beginning of the book was so entertaining. Banter and the back and forth that existed between January and Gus was just too good. I loved reading their romance. I loved watching them fall in love. I loved watching them share pieces of themselves with each other. I really enjoyed that this book did center on writing and the construction of a novel. I felt like that was a really fun backdrop for a romance to play out. Not to mention, a small vacation town is always a great place to fall in love. I mean, small ice cream shops and bookstores and book clubs and all of those things. It's fun simply to read. I do feel like the first half of this book was stronger than the second half, and the end felt a little accelerated and a little like too sickly sweet for me. But at the end of the day, like, I'm picking up a steamy, fluffy romance to feel good at the end, and I do feel like this was a fun ride. I was expecting it to be a little more emotionally impactful just based on some previous reviews, and while I do feel like it was emotional, I wouldn't say like I was crying my eyes out or anything like that while reading this book. But honestly, this is one of the better contemporary romances I have read recently, and I read it so fast, which was exactly what I was looking for, and I would give this like a 3.75, 4 stars. Next up, I was able to read this month was Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Morano Garcia. I had such high expectations going into this book, and honestly, I feel like Sylvia Morano Garcia exceeded them in every way. This is a dual perspective noir style story set in Mexico City in the 1970s, and these two perspectives are exactly why I loved this book so much, because they are so exceedingly different, and yet they kind of crash course into each other's life and become involved in this political conspiracy that I just could not help but be entertained through and through. The first character we follow is Maite, and she is a secretary who just turned 30, and she's feeling a little down on her life. She doesn't feel beautiful, she doesn't feel like she's desired in her life, and she doesn't feel like she's going to capture that dream romance that she sees and reads so often in the comic books that she loves. She also heavily romanticizes her life quite a bit, and she's constantly seeking little thrills, and one of her outlets for doing this is like stealing small trinkets from her neighbor. At the beginning of this book, one of her neighbors actually asks her to watch her cat, and she readily agrees because she wants to snoop around her neighbor's apartment. But when her neighbor goes missing, she kind of finds herself in the midst of this very dangerous political conspiracy that is unfolding right before her eyes. And the other main character we follow is Elvis, and he is employed in the underworld, and he's basically an enforcer. He disguises himself as a student and breaks up protests and other types of rebellion that exists within Mexico during this time. Any type of political uprising is pushed down as hard as possible by the government. Elvis doesn't love his job by any means, but he doesn't really know what else he can do with his life. At the beginning of this book, he is told by his boss to try to find this missing woman, and when he begins to do surveillance, he runs into our other main character, Maite, and their lives begin to intersect from there. This book is just so entertaining. The 1970s setting, the noir style just shines from the rainstorms and the car chases and all of the cigarettes being smoked. You can't help but to be drawn in. And also the political element of this is really interesting as well. All of these underground individuals trying to rise up against the government and protest in any way they know how is kind of the backdrop to everything that's going on. But the true star of this book is the contrast between the points of views of our two main characters. First, we have Maite, who's very conservative, and she gets wrapped up in this conspiracy in this woman that she doesn't even like that much, but it's because she finds the idea of it so romantic and she finds it so adventurous. She finds the players to be interesting and handsome, and she wants to feel like she is at the center of her own story, despite the fact of how dangerous it is. So seeing her kind of make excuses for herself to keep pursuing this incredibly dangerous mystery for really no stakes for herself is just fascinating. And then coupling that with Elvis, who has one of the most intense narrations I've encountered in a long time. This guy's mind moves at like a mile a minute, so seeing how he digests things around him and also explains his life is just so fascinating to read, and the combination of these two characters is just everything to me. All of this wrapped up in that noir style setting. I just couldn't put this book down. I read it obviously in under 24 hours. It was a really fast read. It was a really entertaining read. And for me, it landed. I don't know. I know some people don't love this book, but for me, I just love Sylvia Morano Garcia's writing. I thought the characters were so interesting, and the plot line and the mystery was really interesting as well. I mean, there is at the center of this book a missing girl, and trying to figure out who, what, where was also rather cool as well, but I just love the characters. I was so entertained. I gave this book a 4.25 out of 5 stars. And the very last book I'm just going to quickly mention, as I'm still in the midst of reading it, and that is If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This is a story that is set in modern day Seoul. It's multi-POV and follows a group of women who kind of live in and around the same building. This is a story that really touches on things like misogyny, beauty standards, and sexism in modern day Korea and Seoul. Particularly, it follows a lot of women who are just kind of living their everyday life, but also how beauty and beauty standards are very central to their existence. And also class is a huge element of this as well. And this concept of, wow, if I had your face, this is what I would be doing, and how constantly people are looking outside of themselves, and how constantly, no matter their circumstances or the face that they have, they're constantly looking to others about dreaming what would it be like to have their face instead. So far from what I've read, I'm really captured by the writing style, and the overall substance of the story has really drawn me in so much. I feel like I'll be able to finish this book really quickly next month, but I did want to quickly mention it as I did start it in the month of March. Alrighty guys, those are the 9 books I got to this month. I truly cannot believe I read so much. Please let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and hopefully the sound quality of this video was good. I honestly have no idea. I did so many tests, but you just never know until you start. But nonetheless, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.